Let's talk about the Joint Commission and the role a Joint Commission plays in reviewing a hospital's performance.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunter.
Good afternoon, Good afternoon, Mr. Hunter.
I thought you said you didn't have a report.
I don't know, sir. You're not
listening.
Perhaps I'm not being clear today. I do not have access to the 2018 report.
That sound was Hunter's soul leaving his body.
I thought I buried this Dracula several years ago.
But you have an opinion to a reasonable management probability that the failure of the medical executive committee to address this caused or contributed to the harm of Mike Walsker.
Objections beyond scope.
You can answer.
Thank you. I do believe that this failure on the part of the governing body contributed.
And this particular individual happens to also be remarkably charismatic and have phenomenal hair to combine with my, I guess, phenomenal beard.
At 2, Rob, you're going to jump on the good hair stuff too? Really?
Dude, why not? I mean, I can't keep this thing in order.
Thank you for that. And speaking of looking fabulous, coming to the program right now, Dr. Joe Corcoran, who we have also labeled here as Dr. Good Hair. How are you?
I'm great. Can you? Well, I hope everybody can hear me. I just went through an absolute panic trying to get my earbuds to work. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, please? All right, outstanding. And hopefully I can hear you too. So, hey, thanks and welcome back, advocates. Man, I got to tell you, the feedback that I have gotten in the last couple of days about the conversation that we had with Stephanie was just remarkable. You know, I can't tell you how many folks that I've spoken to who were literally in tears hearing her story. Really remarkable, a remarkable story of resilience, strength, perseverance, advocacy. Just a really remarkable young lady. You know, I've had a couple of conversations about how can we best help her. And I know that one of the things that I need to do is I need to, and I'll probably work with Gothic Brina on this because she's so awesome about stuff like this. I need to put up the links to the 3 organizations that supported Stephanie in her appeals and lifted her up when she was way, 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 way down. And so, you know, the Innocence Project, the Exoneration Project, and the, I can't remember the name of the third organization out of Madison, Wisconsin about integrity in forensic evidence. But we will be supporting her. We will be supporting those organizations, and maybe doing something more. You know, this community is so amazing about coming up with ideas of how to help, and I know that everybody's got the energy to help. So really excited about that. I also, Gothic Brina called me out on this, and I am guilty as charged. I know that for those of you who are members and are the top tier advocates, you know, I promised that we would have members only meetings and that I would also provide you swag from the breakfast company. So I'm actually in Sarasota tonight. My wife is down here, so I will get to the restaurant this week and figure out Center for Integrity and Forensic Science. Thank you very much, Gothic Brina. I will figure out how to get swag to you as promised. A promise made, it will indeed be a promise kept. And I apologize for dropping the ball on that so far, but appreciate the reminder from Brina. So really, 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 really excited about having my guest and my dear friend back. We are joined again tonight by Mr. Kansas City himself, Fred Neis. Welcome back, Fred. Super to have you again.
Thank you, Joe. I got 4 really, 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 reallys out of you tonight, so I'm shooting for 5 next time.
Don't worry, you just keep coming back, and we'll add to it. I promise. So, Fred, how are things with you? Everything good?
Yeah, everything is really good. This moment of we are all interwoven in our lives today. But for the advocates on the line tonight, Joe and I were talking just before we came on stage. I am white knuckling it right now in full transparency. My 5-year-old is out in the living room unattended. We're waiting for the babysitter to arrive. So if he makes a cameo, that's what y'all get. That's the real world that I live in today. He's cute as the Dickens, but I'm hoping that he will enjoy the movie.
Babysitters are very often our saviors when we're balancing that parenting life and the rest of life, right?
Absolutely an essential. They are absolutely an essential component of my village. Yeah.
That is fantastic. Well, we will all keep our fingers crossed for you, Fred.
Got it. Thank
you. Fred,
maybe the next time we'll do a cameo.
Oh, no. Hey, listen, they will go crazy for your son, but because I know how crazy they went when they met my dog, Charlie, right? Oh. So, Charlie's cute, but your boy, off the charts.
Thank you. Yeah, kids and dogs. Yeah.
Hey, so Fred, we've had a couple of really amazing guests recently, yourself included. But there were 2 in particular that have really helped us start a deeper dive into the whole topic that is really central to our purpose here on the CMO Dr. Joe channel, and that is advocacy. And that is becoming a more effective advocate for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our neighbors, and even for strangers. We heard testimony from two folks who have really been tested and have come through with a very, very strong performance. First was 15-year-old Annie, who, she was in an evaluation for scoliosis and didn't really feel confident with the doctor that she had. And she sought out a second opinion, did a research, found out who was likely to be the best fit, drove almost 2 hours with her mom from home, and got in front of this surgeon, a scoliosis spine surgeon, who was chair of the department of a major academic medical center. And as he started kind of pushing her in the same direction that the residents and fellows had pushed her, which was a very invasive surgery that would require weeks completely out of school, then weeks of kind of getting back to activities of daily living, and then months of intensive rehab. She metaphorically raised her hand and spoke up. Not metaphorically, she very much spoke up. And she engaged. It's easy to say she confronted the surgeon but that's not truly accurate. She engaged with the surgeon and got him into a dialogue about not what he wanted to talk about, but what she wanted to learn about, and see if a lesser invasive approach would work for her. And still remains to be seen whether it's an option or not. But the bottom line is that she spoke up, and this visit extended almost another full hour beyond where it appeared that it was going to end, right? So she did an amazing job at age 15 of advocating for herself. And then last Thursday, of course, we had Stephanie Spurgeon. And, Stephanie was somebody who was running her daycare at home. And she had a 1-year-old that she had never met before. The 1-year-old, unfortunately, developed a syndrome after she was picked up and taken home, and she ended up in the ER, in the ICU, and unfortunately passed away about 8 days later. They identified the likely cause of death related to child abuse, and they pinned it on Stephanie. The primary witness against her, representing the Child Protective Services, was Dr. Sally Smith, who was a central figure in the Maya Kowalski-Johns Hopkins trial. Based largely on Dr. Smith's testimony, she was accused of capital murder. She was convicted of manslaughter. With that conviction as a felon, she was sent to a maximum security prison for a 15-year term. During her stay, she self-taught to become a paralegal. And she advocated not only for herself, but for others. And finally, her case was picked up by the Exoneration Project, by the Innocence Project, and by the Gothic Brina, you saved me once, save me again, by the Center for Justice. Where is it? I'll find it. But bottom line is that her case ended up getting supported by these Innocence Projects at the end of about 8 years and 2 tries of re-examining the evidence. She ended up having her case overturned, and rather than take her chances at another trial, she accepted an Alford plea, which is you don't admit guilt, but you don't proclaim innocence. And you kind of say, hey, 8 years in, I'm good. And the state says, yeah, we're good, right? And you walk away. So we've had these 2 stories of really powerful advocacy. So you and I were talking last week, and I asked if I could get you back on, and I asked you what I thought was a pretty straightforward request. I said, I would like to talk about advocacy. And you stumped me by asking a very simple question. What kind of advocacy? And honestly, Fred, I had never thought about it that way before, right? But I guess different situations require different approaches. So can we start there? Would you kind of give me a little bit of background and talk me through it?
Yeah, I mean, the lead up is pretty weighty, right, Joe? I mean, both of those stories, as you say, are just amazingly powerful stories, and the individuals who, a 15-year-old who is advocating for themselves, and that in an environment where they're with adults, and it's a sensitive topic. It's about their personal lives. It's about who they want to be and who they want to, who they are. And then and with just as much weight, right? Your last week's guest, who, when she was, really kind of, I would say, kind of put into a bit of a corner or in trying to figure out how to advocate for herself, she ended up really, having to go to some extremes on both ends of that spectrum, and really probably suffered quite a bit. The Alford plea too, I'd just point out, one of the things is that it is essentially essentially an acknowledgement that you're right. It's like, it's not a guilty plea. It's not an innocence plea. It's essentially, to a large degree, an acknowledgement that if going to trial, there would be enough evidence to convict. However, it sounds like, to your point, like they kind of just said, look, let's just step away from this and be done with it. And it sounds like there's probably more to that story that's going to yet to be told moving forward. And as you and I were kind of texting back and forth and then having conversations about kind of the advocacy, it is very personal, and it's about knowing your rights and knowing your preferences. So a little bit more probably on the preferences side in the first story with Annie and really knowing your rights in both of those cases as well. And it can take different shapes and different sizes because of who we are and the lens we need to look through that moment in, and that could be and you've got obviously all of your advocates here tonight that are listening tonight and that will listen in the future. Potentially advocating, one, for themselves, so that's one lens. Two, potentially advocating for a loved one, that's another lens. Three, some of them are caregivers, direct caregivers, doctors, nurses, therapists. And so they may be advocating for someone they're caring for. And then there's the advocacy piece too, where you mentioned strangers, and I'd say too, the strangers in the community. How do we advocate as a group for our communities and what's best as well for our communities? So I think there are a lot of different lenses that we can look through to kind of think through what advocacy looks like, feels like, and should be like to take care of one another. Absolutely. So I think about it different ways that way. And then, what's the scenario in which we would talk about, that? So is it about care? Is it about your rights and your civil rights potentially? Is this about your experience? Is this a consumer experience? And the one that I've got, some stories we can unpack across the evening. One of them could be about billing, and how do you advocate for yourself just in something like billing in the healthcare field as well. So there are a lot of ways we can go with this. I'll be excited to hear from your advocates as well. Because a lot of this is unscripted and unplugged. So there's a lot of different ways we can look at it.
And Fred, you tapped into one of my ambitions for this channel is to make it much more interactive. And so I just want to say to the advocates who are dialed in already, until we kind of set up those regular portals, because what I anticipate one day, Fred, is actually having folks joining us on video or at least on telephone, right? But until then, if you've got questions, put them in the chat. If you want them to stand out, put them in the super chat. I promise you we will get to at least all the super chat questions, and I do my best to keep an eye on the questions too. So if you want to ask questions, fire away over there. One of these days, Fred, we will get this to the level of interactivity that I'm hoping for. So let me point out, by the way, so you have your explanation sounded very academic to me, right? It reminded me of learning something in a learning environment, right? I'm not saying you sounded professorial, but you did sound like a lot of our teachers.
I wouldn't say that, but it sounded like you kind of thought this through beforehand.
Once or twice, yeah. So
I didn't want to wing it for your advocates just yet. I'm winging it here as of now. Yeah, the questions get tougher.
So this audience knows. In fact, somebody on the last live stream, I hope they weren't mocking me, but they said it's funny how everybody who's on the show is a longtime dear friend of Joe's, right? But we
all want to be your friend, all of us. Yeah.
So I do want full disclosure. You and I have actually been friends for 13, 14 years, if memory serves, right? Yeah, when we started working together. So, but in the more than a dozen years that you and I have been friends, it wasn't until last week that I learned that you actually have authored book chapters in the emergency medicine field, and specifically book chapters about advocacy. I never knew that before.
I just want to be your friend, Joe. I just want to be your friend. It doesn't matter what I do. It's about friendships. It's even our children, right? Our children can't tell anybody what we do for a living. So, yeah, I was very fortunate in that I did get to be the section editor for a leadership book in emergency medicine. Specifically, the section was around health policy and advocacy. So, yeah, it was
very cool,
really fun experience.
I hate to digress, but you brought up that our kids can't describe what we do. Yeah. When my daughter, who's now in college, was about your son's age, I went to her school for the Father's Day program on the Friday before Father's Day weekend, and they had made just paper ties and painted them all up, which I thought was awesome. And on the back, it said, "I love my daddy, he ... And, one of my friends is an orthopedic surgeon. He fixes broken bones. One of my friends is a lawyer. He sues people. My daughter, hand to the heavens, said, "My daddy goes to Gator football games."
Oh. I don't know how that turns on the lights in your house, but that sounds like a pretty good gig.
If I could only figure out how to make that pay the bills, I'd be a happy man. So anyway, so let's talk more about, your academic orientation to advocacy. I think really opens up, as you said, opens up a lot of directions that we can go in. But, where I'd like to start, Fred, is what are the commonalities between the different types of advocacy? In other words, if you were going to get started and not really know where you want to make your biggest impact, what are the ideas? What are the ideas and ideals? What are the characteristics? What are the traits? What are the practices or habits or disciplines that if you focus there in the beginning, it supports you no matter where you want to take this?
Yeah. So you're really just looking like, what are the features? Like, what are the common features that every advocate, regardless of which lens we look through, we really need? And I think the first one's around just kind of understanding where you're at, right? Like that's the education of understanding. Let's just keep it within the kind of the healthcare space, but the condition, the illness, the injury, the trauma, and understanding that and being educated in that space. Whether you're the individual who is suffering from this, or you're the individual who is advocating as a caregiver, or you're the one advocating as a family member, it's to get educated, right? It's to understand a little bit about that situation, and also probably understand a little bit, and you can go research this, Before the internet, Joe and I had to read books to do a lot of this. And the Dewey Decimal System was very much our friends.
Hey, don't give away our age here, bud.
That's right.
My young friend.
Yeah, but because of the advent of the internet, a lot of this can be researched on the internet, with the cautionary tale. You've got to understand who's kind of authoring the material, but you can learn a lot just going out into the internet and searching under those terms and the illnesses and traumas and conditions to kind of get yourself up to speed on understanding it. Communication is huge. So how we use our words, how we want to communicate with each other is paramountly important, right? The more you probably escalate, the less you're probably likely to get kind of the positive outcome that you're expecting. But the more that we kind of use our words and we stay calm and try to really articulate, and maybe not even do it in the moment, and be able to do it preemptively, like to lead in to maybe a visit with a physician or a specialist. Hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. This is kind of what I want to get out of it. We don't have to answer this over, emails or my chart or the VPN through the VPN. But I just wanted to prepare for this, for our time together, because it's very stressful, right? Like particularly as an advocate for yourself as a patient with a condition or as a loved one, it can be very stressful. And sometimes it can feel very rushed in the moment in those appointments and those interactions. So giving yourself some space to communicate and an opportunity to communicate up front can be really helpful. I don't know how far you want me to go with this. We've got this question up here, but
it's not a question. It's just an observation. Robbie McCann has been very active in the chats, and she is an advocate in the sexual abuse and domestic violence space. And and the comment that she made was right in line with what you were talking about. Is setting boundaries and big capital letters, educating yourself on what it is that you're going through, having information. And, of course, what I've also heard from in other conversations on this channel, Fred, is that not everybody, not each clinician, the physicians and nurses want to hear about the Dr. Google research that you did. So if you follow what you advocated and what Robbie advocates about education, but you run into that, where did you get your medical degree? Right. BS attitude. What do you do then?
Well, we could spend a lot of time just on that, and it can be tough, right? It kind of goes back to, these are really intense moments and they're very personal for us. So when I need to go advocate for myself in terms of what I want, or I'll use a story that just happened to me a couple months ago with my son. I took him in. He'd had recurring earaches. I kind of know enough about healthcare. I kind of know where that trajectory is going to take us. And it was clear that the individual caring who was at the urgent care clinic didn't access our records before we got there. She didn't really want to understand kind of the background before she prescribed antibiotics. And I was like, hey, I'm not getting the feel that this is going the way I'm expecting this to go. Like antibiotics, maybe not really where we need to go with this. He just got a course. And it took me time to kind of walk out and decompress a little bit. And then I went back to his primary care physician, because it was in an integrated network, and said, hey, if you're up for this, like, we'll do the antibiotics. If this is what this is kind of that second opinion. If this is what you say is the right answer, then I'm all in. I'll totally do that. But, knowing what I think I know about the healthcare system and kind of the progression for these ear infections, that's probably not where we need to land. And, we eventually kind of found some middle ground and had those conversations. But kind of getting back to your real question, like, where did you get your law degree? As the equivalent as well. Good clinicians and clinicians that we probably want to continue to work with and have relationships with will listen to us and will take in what we have to say, particularly if we come kind of armed with the education and the understanding. I think we as the patient, me as the patient, I do need to understand that there are probably some guardrails, and I should be able to ask good questions. And I should expect that my clinicians, my physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, nurses, can answer back with either, that sounds like we should probably go that way. We could go that way. Or what do you want to do? Or it's, watching that television commercial on your latest medication is probably not worth it, because that medication on TV requires you to have these 6 symptoms. And from what you've described and what we've documented, you only have 3 of those 6. And this is probably why we don't want to start that medication just yet. But we could put it in the hopper of things that we would want to talk about or consider, in the future.
I really like the tactic that you deployed about you knew that you weren't going to change the perspective of the clinician at the urgent care center. So you took it, duly noted, but then you went back, and I like the term, you got a second opinion from the doctor who sees your son most of the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very, very smart. And again, keep in mind that most of this audience is non-clinical. So, there is an asymmetry to knowledge and expertise in most of the settings that we all listen. I haven't practiced in 20 years. I'm not, I can't go toe to toe with my internist who's, a lot more current than me. Right. So, but, we can get a second opinion. We can ask for somebody else to come into the room in many situations. So, it's kind of, I know that you're automatically labeled a Karen these days if you ask for the manager, but sometimes you do have to work your way up the food chain. Is that, would you agree?
I would agree. And it depends on each setting, kind of how, as the advocate, I'd want to do that, right? Like, and it depends on the setting. If it's a lower acuity setting, maybe a planned or appointed visit where you scheduled yourself, that may be an opportunity where in kind of a lower level environment like that, and I don't mean it as like low level in terms of acuity or in terms of like importance, but where there's a little bit of like a kind of a routine already established, that might be a place where you'd want to ask, like, you know what, is there somebody else I could get a second opinion from? Like, I'd like to compare some notes. Again, it's kind of how you want to handle it and use your words. Then there are other places where maybe that's not going to fit as easily. So it might be an emergency department where you're kind of more limited on staff. But there may be opportunities to ask for a specialist and a consultation if clinically, seemingly clinically appropriate. But there are other places where, individuals may try to advocate for themselves or their families and it doesn't work out, or maybe it isn't necessarily always, it's not within the guardrails of what we would traditionally consider advocacy. So I wasn't planning on sharing this story so early, but you kind of led me to water. So here we go.
All right.
Yeah. Well, so very, very early in my career, I was an ICU nurse. I'd graduated from nursing school. I was an ICU nurse in a trauma center here in the Kansas City metro area. This was a while ago. And I was taking care of patients in an adult ICU. And I had just come back to my 3-day tour. So typically nurses, we do 12-hour shifts, 3 days on, 4 days off. You can mix and match, but essentially that's the basics of how nurses on ICUs work, or 312s. And I was just coming back onto my first tour of 3 days, and I got my assignment of 2 patients and went in, evaluated both the patients, kind of did all the things I was supposed to do. The families were in the room because it was visiting hours. I was working the night shift, so visiting hours were about to end in an hour or so. And I came back out and it was charting, probably on paper. And all of a sudden the charge nurse comes up to me and says, "Hey, I need to give you a heads up on something." And I said, "Sure, what do you got?" She said, "The patient's family members over here have asked that you no longer be her nurse tonight." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, they really like you. They think you're really competent. They really were impressed with all the things you did, but she's a 17-year-old girl," and I was about 24. "And because you're a man, they don't want you taking care of their daughter."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, what did you say?" And she said, "Well, I had to explain to them as gently as possible that because it wasn't about his competency or whether or not he was a nice guy or you liked him generally, but solely based on his gender, you were going to discriminate against me, Fred, that we were unable to make a staffing change." So there are some scenarios where advocacy might kind of go over that tipping point, and we kind of need to know as people and advocates, like, where those guardrails might sit.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's a tough conversation, right? Like, you want to honor the family.
sure.
I get what they're saying. I totally understood what they were saying. And so did the charge nurse, but we also, have to kind of find that balance somewhere. And I took care of her the next couple of days. The family liked me. Things were great. And, she got better.
That's awesome. And certainly I ran into that from time to time in my specialty, OBGYN.
Mm-hmm.
I never was in a patient's room without a chaperone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for the patient safety as much as it was for my own.
Mm-hmm.
But the but the the specialty has evolved so much. When I was in training, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth,
Before
most of the residents were males, and now OB/GYN is probably 80% female. And even when males train the full 4 years, the job market is not as open and available. It's one of the few jobs, and I grew up in a house full of 5 sisters, and they're all professionals, and I've heard about pay disparities. OB/GYN is one of the few specialties in medicine where the females absolutely make more money in first year than males, right? So there is a little gender equality there. I could say that with certainty, but it's very. But you're right. I mean, you may not agree with the family's concerns, but you have to respect them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And there are situations where we might have to think about gender as an issue, and we may have to try and make some switches out. Absolutely.
Yeah. Tuco Limited, who is a friend that she said, "Hey, Dr. Joe, when you're in the throes of giving birth, you don't care who's down there." And I have found that to be largely true. I actually showed up. I was covering labor and delivery on New Year's Eve, and everything was quiet. So I went to a very fancy party downtown, put on my tuxedo. Of course, got called back to labor and delivery, and I'm wearing my tux, and I said I ran in, and the patient was pushing, and I said, just give me a couple of minutes to get into some proper clothes, and she said something very similar to that comment. It's like, I don't care who you are, what you're dressed like, get in here now. I need to have his baby now. So it's priorities, and more priorities. So,
yeah. Well,
actually, yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, Fred.
I was going to say, right. That's the message. It's just somewhat situational too. Like, there are urgent and emergent moments. Like, when people still call 911 and I show up on an ambulance, like, this is what you got. Like, there's no backup. There's no changing out Fred for somebody else. This is what happens when you call 911.
And I know that the timing of you sharing your ICU story was not as you had anticipated, but it really feeds in nicely. And this is a question that Michaela has asked before, and this does not reflect my experience. Maybe Michaela is having difficulty finding nurses who are trained with ventilators outside of the hospital setting. Certainly inside of the hospital setting, we see them a lot, but many patients have ventilator needs outside of the hospital setting on a chronic basis. So what is your experience with RNs and their training on ventilators? Is that an ICU specific skill set that's taught?
It's not necessarily. So, I mean, this is a great question. So thanks, Michaela. I really appreciate it, because I think those are the ones that, seriously, and at times I think we kind of all of us scratch our heads a little bit about necessarily around what does the complement need to look like, and the skills for each one of the providers. So it's a great one. On the acute side, as Joe just mentioned, it is my experience, at least, and I think still is, really the expected standard of today, is that nurses generally know how to operate a ventilator. In the hospital, we are amazingly blessed to have respiratory therapists who know way more than we will ever know about ventilators and VTU. So I would mostly leave it to them in the hospital setting. In the less acute care setting, but in the home or outside in different care settings, that's one of the things that we're constantly needing to evaluate is what are the skill sets that the nurses or a respiratory therapist or a technician all need to have, and what's their level based on the types of people that they're serving. So, not knowing much more. I mean, those are the types of things that, as an advocate, you could start to advocate for. Here's my need. How do I get my needs met? For either myself or my loved one? How do I advocate for that? What do I need to educate myself on? What do I need to understand? There may be scope of scope issues, for scope of licensure issues within a particular state, where it doesn't allow for a nurse to be able to even operate a ventilator outside of an acute care space. So it does require a little bit of that and education, that communication, that collaboration with the organization that's helping take care of you or your loved one. So yeah, it's an interesting algorithm, but we struggle with it every day.
You know, Fred, one of the forms of advocacy that I think are the most rewarding when they finally pay off is something that Christina B raises. My daughter has a difficult to diagnosis immune disease, and the doctor who finally diagnosed her after years of seeking answers was an older male, and he retired, and she always felt so blessed to find that doctor. And you know, I think one of the more frustrating, but until it pays, it's frustrating until it's not. But keeping the hunt up to find somebody who really understands what it is that's causing the pain, causing the symptoms, causing the discomfort. You know, it's we've talked about it on this program before about how, you know, you may be an orthopedic surgeon, but you know, are you the shoulder doctor? Are you the hip doctor? Are you the knee doctor? Are you the the sports medicine doctor? Everybody seems to have their little niche, and you know, the common phrase is that the last doctor is always the smartest one, right? You keep shopping until you find that knowledge base that aligns with whatever it takes to help remedy what is causing you down this healthcare search in the beginning. But I just wanted to highlight Christina's experience, because I think it's something that many patients, many family members, and especially many parents will find themselves in. So, you know, as a dad, as well as somebody who has, you know, been on the hospital clinic side of it, words of encouragement, words of advice about keeping the hunt going.
Yeah, words of encouragement, words of advice. Absolutely. It's like finding that lost sock. It's always the last place you look. You know, so you know, it's same with the
I've never thought of myself as a lost sock, so thank you.
You're welcome. You know, it's in particularly, you know, in the situations, I would say probably for me, at least personally, it's the advocating for my child that's the most stressful to me. Like, I can advocate for myself. I feel like I'm an adult. I'll kind of figure it out. But really, it's the stressful moments for advocating for my child that, you know, this is Dad Bear, and Dad Bear is on it. I think, you know, I reflect on, so I see a little bit of the chat here about, there almost was a common theme for a couple of folks around, it was a physician who finally retired, but had figured out or run some extra tests and finally found the diagnosis. And I don't want to put it to age or experience, but I do think that there is an intersection somewhere within our careers where we do have just enough experience and just enough education and just enough kind of capabilities that we stop and we listen. And that's probably, as I had a physician say to me years and years ago, Fred, if you just stop and listen to the patient, you're going to find out what's wrong with them, because they're going to tell you. And I think that's right. Like, I think if we just slow down, and I think kind of to the advocacy piece, as I might be looking for someone to take care of me or my children, you know, one of the things that I look for is someone who's willing to slow down a little bit, somebody who's willing to sit down and not just stand in the room, but sit down and has the characteristics that I like, that seem like they're listening to me. And I think that's really vitally important in that piece is finding the person who seems like they're truly listening to me.
And Fred, I would 100% agree with you. I would also challenge that in order to find that good listener, I think you need to become a good active listener. someone who's not always just teed up to make the next statement, but is actually willing to sit back and listen when it's their turn.
I think that's a really good point. I think as we think about not just what makes a good advocate, but what also makes a good clinician and vice versa, I think that's absolutely an attribute for all parties in the room. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and it goes back to, you know, the one of the fundamental points that we talked about the last time you were on, and that is that, you know, you really need to approach more in a spirit of collaboration than confrontation, right? You know, what's the old saying about attracting more bees with honey than vinegar? You know, and but just finding that common ground and reinforcing, hey, you know, doctor, nurse, we're on the same side. We both want me to feel better. That's why we're both here. So let's work together on this. I'm not fighting you, but I do need you to hear me, and I promise that I will hear you. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it was one of the values that we learned even through our days to working together. It's around the active listening piece and really being able to learn how to communicate, the force of ideas and the power of language. Yep.
Going back to those 7 pillars. Well played.
I can't. I had a conversation with a former colleague earlier today, and we were talking about that very thing. It's about culture, and it's about culture in the relationships as well with the people we care for and the people we care about, and how do we advocate? Yep.
For sure. So is there what would your playbook say if there was a playbook? What would your playbook say if anyone in the audience, anyone in the community found themselves just at the end of their rope and they have tried to be an active listener, they have tried to engage in a collaborative, non-confrontational way, if they have tried to align everyone on, hey, we're both after the same thing here. You know, let's face it, Fred. Sometimes you're in a conversation with somebody who's just not going to come around and work with you, right? Whatever's going on in their life, they're stressed, they're thinking they're worried about something at home instead of here in the clinic, etc. What do? What do you have been? I know that part of your earlier career was overseeing clinical settings in a health system. So what do you do if you're in one of those clinical settings and you're just not getting what you need? How do you advocate for yourself in the moment?
Yeah. Okay. In the moment, I didn't know where we were landing the plane in terms of, like, is this an acute care issue? Is this kind of, a chronic set of conditions? So, in the moment, it's tough, right? Because it's personal to us and it's stressful to us, and we come seeking help from those that we expect should be able to help us, and then we end up very quickly disappointed, potentially frustrated, maybe even angry, because we're not feeling like A, we're being heard, and B, that we're headed in the right direction to start feeling better. And so it's tough all the way around, and then we've got this mishmash of emotions that are going on, and yet we still need to advocate for ourselves in a relatively rational way. So it is exceptionally tough to do so. There are different ways to kind of think about going about it. If you are in a position where you can seek a second opinion and you can back out and kind of regroup and think about, should I go find a different specialist, someone who will meet my needs and listen to me, and we can kind of find whatever that middle ground needs to be. That's probably one of the more optimal solutions. If it's in the moment though, and you're not in a position where you can negotiate the second opinion at some later date, and you really need some help, I mean, there are certainly different ways we can go about that. You can ask for an immediate second opinion, potentially within another caregiver who's within that clinic space, who's on the floor. Maybe it's another hospitalist, maybe it's another emergency medicine provider, maybe it's another intensivist or a pulmonologist. You can ask for a second opinion from a colleague, and it doesn't have to be a direct colleague.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be ICU pulmonologist, and you ask for somebody from endocrine to come and take a look at your diabetes. So you can kind of think about it that way, and have those and pose it as a question, not necessarily as a demand. Like, I want to see an endocrinologist. Probably won't have the same results as, hey, what do you think if I have an endocrinologist come and consult? And pose it as an open question. Probably will get you the bees and the honey. There you go. bringing it back for you. The bees and the honey for Joe. And then go ahead.
No, I was just going to say one of the frustrations that the Kowalskis experienced in their interactions with the team at Johns Hopkins was that they wanted to bring the treating physicians in to kind of give them at least a second opinion, if not share their insights with the team of doctors at the hospital. The hospital-based physicians didn't necessarily interact with the community physicians, so the Kowalskis wanted to bring them in and have those conversations. And the way that the leaders at the hospital, particularly Dr. Perno, who was the chief of staff, then the VP of medical affairs, and is still a high-level administrator in the hospital. The way that he fielded that was, well, you can't come in unless you're a treating physician. And if you're going to be a treating physician, you need emergency privileges. And, I don't think that was what the Kowalskis really wanted. I don't want, listen, I'm bringing in somebody who has seen my daughter, half a dozen times, a dozen times. I just want this to be a conversation.
Yeah. I think that's a really good, poignant story too, that we sometimes get caught up in the traps of even sharing information and integrating the stories and bringing folks together to kind of figure out what that care plan is. And more than once, I've had individuals say to me, "Oh, because of privacy rules, I can't even share this information with you." And as an advocate, HIPAA is not designed to be, an iron gate for information. It's actually meant to design to protect people, but also help kind of facilitate the sharing back and forth to the people who need the information most. That's part of the arming of knowing the education of HIPAA as well, to bring folks together and share the information. And that's part of the purpose of HIPAA. Yeah.
I'm actually writing down as a show topic idea to discuss HIPAA, because what you're trying not to say is that there are some folks in healthcare, especially in hospitals, who will use HIPAA as a shield, right? And keep them out of conversations that they may not necessarily want to have, but they're, in many, many cases, is not a federal law against it, right? Yeah. They're just uncomfortable or unwilling or uninterested to have that conversation. So maybe we'll do a conversation around HIPAA and help the audience better understand. Because again, it's the Health Information Privacy Act, right? It was meant to keep your records private from prying eyes, right? And we had one of my hospitals out west was a burn center near Hollywood, Burbank. And it was a very, very high performing burn center or it was more than that, but it had this burn center. And it took in a lot of famous people that were involved in car crashes or accidents or what have you. And, we had a very, very, very active system that would track who accessed those medical records. And of course, when a celebrity's in the hospital, hey, what's he here for? What's she here for? And so, the HIPAA was meant to keep eyes that have no business knowing your business.
Yeah, that's right.
Out there.
That's
right. It wasn't meant to be a stone wall that you hid behind because you don't want to take 5 minutes and answer some questions, right?
That's right. Well, and what I think you're not saying is the fact that HIPAA, it had to be a law because apparently we couldn't control ourselves and we'd go look at these records. And so the federal government had to step in and say, you can't do that, right? Like, so I think that's a bit of an indictment upon us as an industry. Like, we should know better than to go just peeking in people's records. I wouldn't necessarily want anybody peeking at mine. So it is an indictment of us.
Fred, once again, it's kind of one of those things of like, did we really need a law for this?
Right. That's right. It's 100%. Did we really need to say it out loud in writing in legal terms and put penalties around it? Yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah. That's probably a pretty sad indictment, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Well, and that's really important for all of us to know too, as advocates. Like, there is opportunity though, that particularly if there's a large population of having similar experience, that large population can help as a groundswell to advocate for change. And that's what really happened there to get us to HIPAA. Was a groundswell of people like your advocates online tonight who said, wait a minute, this isn't okay. And if the health system isn't going to stop it, we'll help them stop it. We'll just go this way and get it done.
Yeah. So really good point raised by one of my very regular members in the community of advocates is Ruby. And Ruby, thank you very much for your comment. And I'm so glad that you brought this up, but about discussing advanced directives as well as the healthcare decision making before the crisis, right? I had this conversation with my wife a couple of years ago, and Ruby, you reminded me I need to have the conversation again because Patty and I have very different ideas about length of life versus quality of life, right? And listen, I hope and I pray for good health, and I want to be a part of I want my life to be intertwined with hers and with the children and with our friends like you, Fred, for a long time. But, I still struggle to know whether, I know that I helped my mom live at least 2 years longer than I think she was maybe engineered to. And I don't know now that, she's been gone a couple of years, and I honestly don't know if I did the right thing or not. Right. So that quality of life and what have you. But, so Ruby brings up a great point about discussing it today before anybody is put in that pressure situation. Nothing better, Fred, than walking in and going, listen, I know how my loved one feels about this. And if they were able to speak for themselves, I know that they would say, boom, right? Because then you are truly just advocating. You're not making any guesswork, any decisions, right?
Yeah, I think, Ruby, this is an amazing PSA, number one. So thank you so much. And number two, I think it's probably a homework assignment for everyone that listens to this podcast tonight, is to go back home and make sure that you've got updated advanced directives and that you've shared your wishes with your loved ones. Because, Joe, as you just mentioned, it's a tough conversation to have to sit down with the family members when we know that really medically not much more we can do, if anything, and have to have them in the moment think through, like, what would Fred really want? And because you got divergent opinions if there are 3 or 4 people in the room potentially, and even if there's only one, like, why place that burden on my brother and potentially to have to make those decisions? That's not fair to him. So, Ruby, I think this is a really great call to action for the night around how to take care of yourself and take care of others, right here, nicely, honestly encapsulated here, and make sure that you have them on record. This happens too. I'll respond to an emergency and someone will say they've got a healthcare directive somewhere, but then they can't find it. And then I still have to go through my protocols and the way that we would normally deliver care that may be very much against the wishes of my patient, because I don't have something that I can legally fall back on and act on medically to take care of their wishes. So Ruby, gold star for you tonight.
So this is completely off script, but it goes back to a conversation.
This is all of this off script after the first.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, all right.
But this allow me to rephrase. This just came to me, but it goes back to a conversation that you and I had a couple of years ago when you were snooping. I think we were sitting at a baseball game together. I think the Rays and the Royals were playing at the Trop, and you looked over at my phone and you saw that where I had, my lovely wife's phone number pulled up, and I had her listed as ICE Patty, and you as firefighter Fred, who also rides the AMBO from time to time. You looked over and you gave me a thumbs up. Can you explain why and what that means?
Yeah. So, okay, 2 homework assignments for your advocates tonight. So advanced directives and healthcare directives. And then number 2, make sure that in your phone, you have an ICE. It's an in case of emergency is what it stands for. And it depends on the make and model. You can actually designate it that way, or you can put it in the contacts as ICE, but make sure that that is accessible. And then that's the person that we as caregivers will call in case of an emergency. And those are the people then who know about you, your health issues, possibly your medications, or at least where to find things in your home. Or if we've transported you to an emergency department and you're unresponsive, we know someone to call that can come and be with you in that moment. So ICE is tremendously important. There's some programs here nationally as well. Maybe there's a third assignment. I'm now making homework assignments for your advocates. They may never have.
They're going to want you back here, dude.
They're going to be like, this guy's nuts. He keeps giving us homework assignments. There are jurisdictions that have programs around kind of similar to ICE, but also in the home, where you may have a pill bottle that is on the refrigerator that has a list of medications in it. So making sure that you have at the ready a list of medications somewhere where we would know how to find it, because that's in our jurisdiction. Because it really helps us immediately start to assess the problem. So sorry, now there are 3 homework assignments for tonight.
Well, see, Fred, it was a buy one, get one. I brought you on to talk about advocacy, but I'm also picking your brain as a first responder too.
There you go. Yeah.
Buy one, get one, man. This channel delivers value, man.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. At the low price of having to listen to me. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I really love the, the nature of the questions that have been coming in and the comments, again, really just about making sure that, decisions in healthcare emergencies very frequently have to be made, number one, almost always have to be made with incomplete information, and very frequently have to be made in a very short timeline. And so some of the things that we've been talking about, which I really appreciate, Fred, is how to put that information at the forefront and put it where it's accessible for, these frontline first responders who are not familiar with our home and they don't know us until they show up. I don't have it on now, but I most days I wear my road ID, which I started to wear. It's a product called Road ID, ROAD, Road ID. And they used to be a lot more affordable than they are now, but I think they got successful and prices went up. But the Road ID is very, very simple. It's a rubber bracelet that has a metallic plate on the front, and it says who I am. It identifies who my in case of emergencies are. And then as the first responder flips it over, there's a code number that you dial the number on the front. That code number actually gives the first responder access to all of my whatever medical information I put on file. So what's interesting is I frequently, used to, a few pounds ago, I used to do very long bike rides, especially on weekends. And I would be out for, 30, 60, 90 miles at a time. And, much of those rides would be solo riding. And heaven forbid I hit a pothole or a car clips me, and somebody finds me, they need that information. What was really brilliant was my daughter was 8 or 9 at the time, and Fred, she asked me, she said, "Well, Daddy, when when I worked with you, we traveled a lot, and we were in pick one of the 48 states, and there was a good chance we were somewhere away from home." And she said, "Well, Daddy, if you're out driving in a rental car and nobody knows, and you're in a state where nobody knows you, why wouldn't you wear your road ID there?" And I thought, that's pretty smart for a second grader.
It's always,
but again, it's
smart ones. Yeah.
And it's about making the information available to the people who need it at the time that they need it, right?
Yeah, you gave me a bunch of thoughts here, and so that I don't shamelessly promote road ID only. The reason I actually have a road ID for all of your advocates is because of Joe. He showed it to me years ago, and I've now worn through a couple of them. I'm a runner, and I've also started wearing it when Hudson and I go out, because if I go down and I'm unconscious, I have a 5-year-old who, while he might know enough to maybe get a phone number out, that road ID then allows the first responders to know who to contact to also help take care of my kid if I'm in a crowd or we're out in a crowd together. So I actually wear it a lot more frequently than I used to, but it's all because of Joe. There are also out there's another technology I just saw out there as well. Same thing, same concept. It's a bracelet. A first responder can put a phone up to it, and through RFID technology, it immediately pops up on our phones, all the information we need. So there are a couple of different, there are all kinds of brands now out there that do all of this technology. All this, your story, Joe, also reminded me to say, from an advocacy perspective, kind of stepping back a little bit, one of the things, because I was thinking about it in the context of, well, what hospital do you get transported to? But it's more broad than that. You've got to know your insurance. You've got to know your coverage for your insurance as an advocate, because that, fortunately and unfortunately, helps set the guardrails of what's in network, what's covered, what's out of network, what's not covered at all. And actually, many insurance companies now have navigators that you can call and will help answer questions that you might want to help advocate for. So there are, different ways to kind of think through and work through advocating for yourself or your loved ones. So, yeah.
Well, we have definitely gotten off the beaten path.
Unscripted after 6:10 p.m.
From where I thought we would be, but all good information. And again, we're not hawking products here,
That's
folks.
right.
We're not. Neither one of us have financial ties to them, other than being consumers and purchasers. But I do want to share good ideas with you whenever we have them. And Michaela asks another question: do paramedics today know how to do trachs and vents? Because I doubt they do, because of what happened to me recently. Well, Fred, not only are you an experienced ER nurse, but you also respond as on your ambulance. So you want to handle this?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Michaela, thanks for the question. I think, these are very scary moments. And I'm sorry to hear that something may have happened to you recently. Paramedics today, if the question is, do we know how to do trachs and vents in terms of perform them? The answer is yes. If the question is, do we know how to handle them if we come into a situation in someone's home and that there's an individual who has a tracheotomy and is on a ventilator? The answer could be a variation of that, depending on the level of training that the paramedic has. So there are various levels depending on the states, depending on the levels of certifications, of how much education, training, and experience they have, and even being comfortable with vents. Keeping in mind, generally paramedics don't run into too many ventilators in home situations. But that being said, there's a kind of a wide range. But one of the things that we look for as a paramedic, and I do too, and I'm pretty comfortable with ventilators, I look for the caregivers to be my partner and help me with them, because ventilators are all designed differently. They have different makes, they have different models. And I can't be familiar with the 36 particular vents that are out there in the market today. And so I really heavily rely upon individuals like yourself. And I would have to say, okay, how do we operate this? How do we do this together in order to make this the best outcome possible? Because I'm comfortable enough, again, knowing it, and most paramedics would be comfortable. The good paramedics will ask you to participate and help them.
Fred, there were a lot of conversations, a lot of comments going back and forth, and I wasn't able to follow them all, but there were a lot of comments around high blood sugar, and with diabetes growing exponentially, figuratively speaking, and almost literally, but as the incidence of not only diabetes, but also metabolic disorder exploding. As a first responder, how are you going to assess a patient or stabilize a patient whose blood sugar, I saw numbers in the 400s and 500s here, and of course that gets you to DKA territory, right?
That's
but
right.
And what can we do to protect ourselves? Because Patty and I just had this conversation. We have such interesting conversations.
I was going to say, you two dive into some of the wildest things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've covered all the routine husband and wife conversation stuff, right?
That's right.
So, but I think that there's a more people are walking around with pre-diagnosed diabetes than we're aware of. So how do you screen and how do you treat when someone is hyperglycemic?
Okay, so we are way off road from the advocacy.
I was just thinking the same thing. I will pull us back.
I saw this going differently in my head.
I agree.
But we can go.
But this is where the crowd's going tonight.
Yeah, that's good. It's funny, you can't see it anymore off your screen there, but at least I can't. But the picture of me with my stethoscope around my neck is a couple years old. Somebody on Joe's team, just for the advocates in the room, somebody on Joe's team decided to do some sleuthing on the internet and found that it is a couple of years old, probably 2 or 3 years old. But it cracks.
I think it's still up there.
There you go. Yep.
There you go.
That's what I look like with a stethoscope around my neck. Yep. And we try to, as paramedics, particularly when we respond to an emergency, as much information as we get, even at the time of dispatch, we still want to come into any situation that we're in with a very open mind, because more than once we have shown up to what we thought was a stroke, and the next thing we're doing is delivering a baby. It really kind of goes in a wide variety and range of stuff. Like, maybe that's a little extreme, Joe, but it's close enough for illustration. And so my point is really, like, as much as, people talk about, the dispatcher tells us, like, you're headed to a chest pain, and we get there and it's a hyperventilation. If that's maybe more of a real example, but nonetheless, we try to go in with a very open mind. And so then it's really about the presentation and the individual who we're taking care of and their family members kind of giving us a story of how did you decide to call 911 today? What has been going on? What are those signs and symptoms? And, more than likely, we will get to a point where then we've kind of narrowed that field in our differential of these are about the 6 things that could be wrong that we probably either need to what we call load and go, just get up and go, because we can't take care of it. It needs surgical intervention or a cardiologist or an OB, and we need to go. Or it's things that we can kind of start moving towards the door, but we can stabilize as we go. So starting the IV, putting them on a cardiac monitor, maybe some oxygen, and then checking a blood sugar. And checking a blood sugar is fairly routine today in the pre-hospital environment on nearly every patient. And so we'll know very quickly. Now, if they're a known diabetic and they said, we just took our blood sugar in the last 20 minutes and it's 550, that's a helpful piece of information. We may repeat it. And this is something that sometimes confuses individuals. Like, why are you repeating something I just said was only 20 minutes old? But because of the way that we have protocols in place and we have to be able to trust our equipment, we probably will repeat it. It's very frustrating to people to see us do it. But that's really the reason that we do it, is we repeat it because we kind of are, we have to do it just to even make sure that we know what we're working with. And then, it could be a whole host of things based on the patient. Are you unconscious? Are you semi-conscious? Are you completely conscious? Oh, all of a sudden, I thought you disappeared for a minute. Are you conscious? Are you semi-conscious? Are you, fully conscious? Can we, and again, going back to the advocates, it's the patient telling us. If the patient can tell us what they would normally do, that's really helpful. If this is new onset, we might not do a whole lot with it between the house and the hospital. We might not do much about it all. So it really just is situationally dependent.
And Fred, I think this is a great opportunity to remind everybody, including you and me, that first responders are not there to diagnose and treat in totality. First responders in particular, and even ER physicians, are really there to triage and to sort or slot the patient into the best arena of care for that patient's needs. Fair statement?
I think that's a really good point. And you're always a great safety net to remind me of the things that we should also cover off on. But I think that's a really good point, that kind of expectation setting amongst advocates as well is, what is a reasonable expectation or a reasonable outcome for that set of interactions with our clients or with our caregivers, right? Like as a paramedic, I would not want somebody to expect that they would say, well, what's wrong with them? Well, I can give you a couple of ideas, but maybe my x-ray vision is broken that day and I can't tell you that it's fully broken. I can tell you with some reasonable degree of certainty it's either badly sprained or broken. Well, we won't know until we get to an emergency department and there's an x-ray and those types of things. And then conversely, getting into an emergency department, their responsibility is to sort out life-threatening versus non-life-threatening. And I kind of simplify it to that degree. And then the life-threatening, they want to treat and stabilize and manage. The non-life-threatening, they're going to move into the appropriate care setting with the right providers and help them along. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Well, Fred, I there's a couple of things that I want to point out, including congratulating Joy W101 for being a member for 2 months. Gothic Brina, my amazing lead moderator, has been a member for 3 months. Nani Ann, member for 1 month. Welcome. And Leandra, a member for 2 months. Great conversation, gentlemen. Keep advocating, friends. Thank you so much for that, Nani. And I do want to share this with you. Michaela gave us some background. She is nonverbal. And in 5th grade, her nurse and paramedics left her ventilator attached to her wheelchair at school. Obviously, thank goodness she's in college and she's doing well. But, I think that helps you and me both understand the nature of some of her questions. But,
I appreciate the context, Michaela. I'm glad you're in college and I'm glad you're doing better. Yeah.
Thank goodness. So, Fred, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you this, but I need to start winding down because here in Florida, we are experiencing sunset. And at the very top of this, not only was I having audio issues, but my light that I use to illuminate my face during these live streams, the light bulb burned out at the top of the broadcast. So
You have some real first world
so-
problems there. And by the way, since it's daylight savings time, I'm pretty sure it's only barely 5:20 there.
No. It's
It's
7:20.
6:20 now. It'd be 6:20.
It goes the other way. It's
That's right.
7:20
That's right.
here in Florida.
Ah,
So
6:20.
yeah. But
Yeah.
so again, I know that we went far afield of our primary objective, and that was discussing advocacy. Are there any other elements of advocacy that you want to make sure that we bring out before I let you go back and resume taking care of your amazing son tonight?
Oh, thank you. That's fun. Well, I will close certainly with thanking all of your advocates as well. And Joe, obviously thanking you for having me back. And, if your advocates ask again, I would love to come back. Maybe not about HIPAA. That's above my pay grade to cover off on. I can only scratch the surface. I think, if I just kind of wrap it all together and go back to the original premise of this conversation was around advocacy. I really, encourage everybody to kind of think through the communication, the education, the coordination of care, and being partners with those around you as part of that village that care for you, that care for your loved ones, and also encourage you to get involved where it really makes sense from a policy and practice perspective. We're joking about HIPAA, but at some point there was a groundswell of people who finally said enough. And there's power. There are power in groups and people. So being able to maybe join some advocacy groups that are particularly personal to you, and joining that campaign as well could be very valuable. Even thinking longer term than yourselves, thinking out there. How do you change the healthcare system for the better? So I really appreciate everybody's time. Thanks so much. These are always fun, and I'm sorry I don't get to see a sunset and some waves like you do.
Well, I will, Fred. You were so compelling in your wrap up. I'm going to throw one last viewer question at you.
All right.
And Leandra says, "Can we do how to advocate at a regular appointment?" Now, I know most of your career has been in hospital settings and system settings, but listen, this is where the rubber hits the road for most of our advocates. So. And so if you could give me your ideas, and I'll try to jump in with a few ideas as well. You're at the doctor's. Number one, what can you do prior to in order to be prepared to advocate? And then number two, how do you make that connection in the moment?
Yeah, I think about it in three phases. I think about pre-appointment, the appointment itself, and then the post-appointment. So I think about how to advocate in kind of those three phases for a regular appointment, as Leandra is calling it. So in the pre-appointment phase, it's about the education. So kind of knowing yourself, knowing the individual you're advocating for, knowing their signs, their symptoms, and potentially trying to communicate those in advance as best as possible to the provider so that they have an idea in their head. Again, as a provider, we don't want to completely shape or bias ourselves, kind of walking in, we know that this is based on that. But it does give us a frame of reference so that when we walk into that clinic appointment, as the clinician, I can kind of start to maybe zero in on some questions and make it a really effective interaction and moment. Prep in the pre-appointment phase, prep the questions too that you want to ask. You might even Google it, like what kind of questions might I ask when I want to go to a visit around being a diabetic? And Google will help you with that. But wait, there's more?
As will the ChatGPT type tools.
Yes, correct. Yes. Yep, that's exactly right. So any of the AI generated, asking AI to help you out is really wonderful. And maybe some of those questions you embed in that pre-appointment communication. During the appointment, as we were kind of discussing earlier, it's about listening to one another, but also making sure that your questions are being answered. So bring those questions with you so that you can kind of tick them off as the advocate to make sure that you're getting your questions adequately answered and you're coming with some resolution. And, you know, consider documenting some of that, because then as you leave that appointment and you've got kind of maybe some discharge instructions, and again, we're all kind of overwhelmed when we're there. I get overwhelmed because sometimes it's even a rapid pace, but even if it's not, all of a sudden I get 3 pieces of paper and I'm like, oh, here's the discharge instructions, but I don't have a chance to read them and really absorb them until I get home. Then get home and absorb all of it and potentially have to respond back and ask some follow-up questions, but also make sure that on the post-appointment side, you've got all of the documentation that you expected, not just for yourself or the individual you're advocating for, but it's also in the medical record, that it reflected in the medical record, because that's vitally important for the care coordination for the future. So those would be kind of my quick hit list of like pre-visit, visit, post-visit.
So I'm going to add one more zone for you, Fred, and that's the pre-visit, and that is when you book your appointment. If you think you might need extra time, let the scheduler know that, okay? Because I will tell you, and I'm going back, you know, to when I was in practice, we had a template. You know, we knew that if I was seeing, I would see my OB patients kind of in a block, right? And we literally would book them about 6 minutes apart because, you know, candidly, they spent more time with my staff and my mid-levels, you know, with the education and the weights and their dipstick, the urines, et cetera. You know, the part that they needed me for tended to be really brief. But if I had a question, if I had a patient that needed my ear, then we would try to schedule those patients towards the end of the morning so that we could take it into the lunch break, right? Because that was easier. And it wasn't easier, it just didn't disrupt every other patient who was trying to come through, right? So if a patient needs extra time, my best advice is make that need known up front. Because the worst thing as a physician, what made me the most uncomfortable was when I had to say, we need to go deeper on this. I don't have time to do that because I've got 20 other patients who are queued up, right? So I would say there's a pre-phase to your 3 phases.
The pre to the pre. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point as part of the advocacy.
Yeah. All right, my friend, I'm going to let you go.
All right, thank you. Thanks to the advocate.
The sun has set. Yeah. Thanks for being
I'm sorry
here, Fred.
We kept you overtime.
And I've already seen several comments. Yes, we want Fred back. So
all right, thank you.
Yeah, don't go too far from your phone.
Yeah.
Sounds great, Fred. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And thank you for your insights around advocacy.
No, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks to your advocates. Have a great night.
You bet. Take care, my friend.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Thank you, Fred Neis, RN, FACHE. There was actually a conversation at the beginning of before we went live. There were questions about what is FACHE, and that is Fellow American College of Healthcare Executives. So there is actually a course of study that is required. You take tests, and Fred kept his head down and did the hard work and passed the tests and went to the educational seminars, and he jumped through all of the hoops, and he earned his fellowship in the American College of Healthcare Executives. That is a designation that is very, very highly regarded among healthcare administrators. So a lot of my colleagues who are chief operating officers, chief executive officers, et cetera, work hard to earn the FACHE, and I'm proud to say that Fred did that. Someone had asked earlier if he was a nurse practitioner. No, that he is a lot of things, but he is not a nurse practitioner. Fred really channeled his nursing education primarily into the leadership side rather than going deeper on the diagnostic side. And quite candidly, that's why they asked him to write a chapter in the books for the American College of Emergency Physicians. So he's been wildly successful in his niche, but that FACHE is not something they give away. So I'm proud of him for being disciplined and structured and committed to earning that designation. Again, I apologize. The light went out about 4 minutes into tonight's live stream. If you were here from the beginning, there was a moment where I went off camera and I was trying to figure out how to get power back to it, and then I realized that you could see on the light switch itself that it has power. We just blew the light bulb. So hopefully we can get another one replaced or repaired, or a new one from Amazon by Thursday night. So Thursday night, I am hoping to have two fascinating young ladies that have started a new movement that I think will really resonate with this group. They started it when they were teenagers, and I think one is still a teen, one might be in her, one might have just turned 20. But I met them and their dad a couple of weeks ago, and I was absolutely smitten with their story, and I wholeheartedly endorse their movement. I'm not gonna preview anything more than that, but keep an eye out for a thumbnail coming to a YouTube channel near you. So again, I would like to have more conversations around how we can make ourselves more effective in the healthcare space, particularly advocating for ourselves, advocating for our loved ones, advocating for our friends and neighbors, and even strangers. Again, many of us have had struggles. Many in the audience have shared their stories of chronic medical conditions, chronic pain. You're aware of my challenges along the way, but fortunately, I feel very blessed that I'm in a place where, yes, it's a part of who I am, but it's not the dominating theme of my life, and I'm very blessed that way. So, but I would like to have more and more conversations about this, because I feel that one of the most valuable things that we can do to help leave our community not as beautiful, but more beautiful than it was left to us, is to extend that hand and help others. And help others. And that's really what I love about this community, is that seems to be what we're all committed to. So again, keep in mind that it is never selfish to administer self-care, because you all know you've got to take care of yourselves so that we can take care of others. I'll see you Thursday night. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Good night.
I will tell you without hesitation, I will tell you that I did not have this anywhere in my 5-year plan, Mr. Anderson.
That much I believe. Yep.
Well, thank you, everyone. Make sure that you take care of yourself so that we can be taking care of others. I'll look forward to seeing you in the coming days. Again, Kurt and Jules, thank you so much for making this a very dynamic conversation today. I'm grateful for your help.
Oh, kill me now. Please tell me this guy's doing some fraud and there's going to be like an insurance investigator or something.
So, Fred, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experience, and can't wait to bring you back, my friend.
I'm looking forward to it. You won't have to try hard. This was a lot of fun. So thank you, everybody.
You hear that? I get the rest of the day off from doctor's orders. That's what I hear.
I will write that prescription anytime for you, sir. And, this will not be our last conversation, especially if you can get me Samantha Lawrence on the show.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll see you before the hearing next week. But thank you for the honor of being your first guest, Joe. And
you bet.
All the kind words. Appreciate it.
Please, let's make sure that we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. Thank you so much.